Good afternoon, I hope you're having an absolutely fantastic day. Now, I've made this video before, but it was about 2 years ago, and it's a pretty cringy video to watch back. And since making that video, certain things have changed about my setup and how I go about listening to records. Primarily being my listening practice, not so much the setup. The setup is pretty much the same, but I'm gonna go through all of that again in this video. And first, I just wanna say thank you to those of you who, in the previous video, pointed out the things that I was getting wrong, because there were several of them. And with that being said, as always, if I get something wrong in this video, and I'm doing something incorrectly, or if I'm doing something that's potentially damaging to my records, please let me know, because I'm not an expert, I'm not a full-time audiophile or anything like that. I'm a hobbyist, I'm an enthusiast, but ultimately I'm just someone who loves listening to music on vinyl. So if I get something wrong, let me know and I'll be sure to correct it. So without any further ado, let's have a look at the setup I've got behind me and talk a little bit about how I listen to records in 2019. So this is my turntable. This is the Project RPM 1.3 Genie, which has since been rebranded as the Project RPM 1.3 Carbon, I believe. I've had this for about 5 years now, I'd say. I absolutely love it. Aesthetically, it has a really cool minimal design. Tonearm here, motor here, which you just flick on and off with a switch there. There's a little anti-skating weight there that you just dangle over the edge. I love this turntable. I think it's great. There have only ever been 2 issues with it. The first is that there isn't a dust cover for it. There is one that exists, but it's like £65 for just like a piece of plastic, and I can't really justify that. And the other thing is that because this is a belt drive turntable and not a direct drive turntable will have the motor positioned directly beneath the platter, whereas a belt drive turntable will have the motor separate to the actual record platter itself, requiring a belt to be there to link them both together. That means that to change the speed from 33 to 45, you have to manually do it by moving this belt from one of the discs to the other. And that gets fiddly, and occasionally that will fall off, and it can be really, really annoying if you're trying to change the speed, and then you have to like fish underneath here to try and get the belt back. Very minimal issue. It's a fantastic all-round record player, and if you're looking for a new one, Project are a fantastic company because they do really high quality products, but they've got a really good range. So you can spend loads on a Project turntable, but they've got a really good range of budget and kind of lower end stuff that still is gonna sound great and give you great performance. I wish that this was a bit thicker. It's a very, very flimsy, thin piece of felt. I keep meaning to buy a thicker mat or get one of those cork ones. I quite like the idea of one of them, but I just keep forgetting to do it. The stylus I've got in here is a classic Autophon 2M Red. I actually made a video a couple of months ago explaining when and how to replace that type of stylus, so if you're interested in seeing that, there'll be a link up there somewhere. It's a perfectly adequate and good sounding stylus, really easy to replace, and it comes with a useful little cap on it as well, so when it's not being used, I always keep the cap on to make sure that I don't accidentally knock it and, you know, bends the stylus at all. At some point in the future, I do intend to get a better stylus for it. There are a whole load of different colors in the Autophon range that are kind of just different increments of sound quality improvement, but at the moment I'm happy with the red one. So this is connected to my amplifier, which is an Audiolab 8000A. Now this is a fairly iconic bit of British engineering, and it is built like an absolute tank. My brother gave me this when he upgraded his amplifier about 7 or 8 years ago, and he got it from our uncle who upgraded his amp about 15 years prior to that. So this has just been going for years and years and years. It shows no signs of slowing down. The only thing that's ever happened with it is I had to replace the fuse once. Now this isn't a valve amp, so it's not going to have any kind of iconic vintage warmth to it, but it's just so reliable, it's so sturdy, it's really, really heavy. Lots of different options for inputs in the back, including an MM and MC switchable phono stage, which is really useful. And then on the front here, you've got your adjustable parameters for the treble and the bass. You can bypass these by just pressing that as well, so you can have it completely flat. I really like these because while they are good, and you can obviously hear the difference when you're using them, I think that the best setup is one where the amp and the speakers just sound great paired together without you having to go and adjust anything, you know. And also it means that you can check mixes well on it. Anyway, yeah, it's nice to have a bit of changeable functionality with the sound, but it's good to know that there isn't, you know, a whole host of graphic EQs on there, because ultimately the amp is good enough by itself. You don't really need to do that. It's just a little bit of minor adjustment for taste. So that's the amp. And then this is connected via banana plugs to my speakers, which are still a pair of Tannoy Mercury 5s or S's. I'm still not sure. It's been 2 years since I made the last video in which I said the same thing. I'm not sure if that's an S or a 5, and I haven't been bothered to look into it. Not the best speakers, I know. I could certainly have something better paired up with my amplifier, and I do in storage have a pair of Bowers & Wilkins DM2s, so really, really old speakers. They are beautiful and warm and lovely and old and vintage and all of that stuff, but they're also massive, and it's a bit too much hassle to transport them. Although I say that, I could probably accommodate them in this flat now. It's just when I was at uni, they were way too big. They're like twice the size of these. Anyway, these are my speakers. Again, I know that they're nothing special, but they have a nice sound quality. They're relatively flat. They're good for referencing mixes on, and I've just never had any reason to complain about them. And I've had these for about 5 years as well. Inherited these from an old friend of mine in Gloucester when I lived there. They've just run perfectly ever since. I still can't work out if if I think that they're astoundingly ugly or just quite chic and cool. So those are the speakers that my system is currently running on. So that is the setup pretty much. I've also got a few accessories up here. So this is a stylus cleaning brush, which is really useful. I'll get into that in a little bit. Anti-static carbon fiber brush, vinyl cleaning fluid, and stylus cleaning fluid. And this right here is one of the most useful things I think I have ever received as a gift. My friend Pranav purchased me this for my birthday last year. It's just a block of wood to hold records, but I found it so useful because it just means that whenever I am playing something, I can have it on display, which not only looks nice, but it protects the record, because in the past I would put the record sleeve down somewhere and it wasn't uncommon for things like inserts and sleeves to fall out, and then if you forget about it and it's on the floor and you walk past, you stand on it and just ruin the artwork and all that kind of stuff. But it just completely alleviates that problem. So yeah, if you've got a spare 10-15 pounds lying around, I'd definitely recommend getting one of those. So that's my setup, a Project RPM 1.3 Genie connected to an Audiolab 8008 amplifier and a pair of Tannoy Mercury S speakers. Now, one of the things that happened in my previous video is I had a big long rant about why Crosley turntables are shit. And if you're buying your first record player, you'd be better off saving your money and getting something better, something that you can control the tracking weight on, for example. And I still stand by that to an extent. You can miss me with that Urban Outfitters faux vintage 40-pound suitcase bullshit. But nowadays there are more options for less money, and this is one of the things that I think is so good about the vinyl resurgence, is that it forces companies to be competitive. They have to start creating products that are good quality but aren't too expensive, the kind of things that teenagers and young people can afford to buy. And that's fantastic. And even Crosley have been bringing out a broader range of turntables, some of which I've seen get really, really good reviews in the kind of budget turntable mark. So if you're looking to get into record collecting and hi-fi in general, there are so many great options for you at a reasonable price point these days. But there is one thing that I will say about hi-fi, especially if you're starting off, that I feel is overlooked a lot of the time, and that is that your system is only as good as its weakest link. If you have a £10,000 valve amp and you try and connect that to a pair of £20 computer speakers, it's not going to be worth it. This mentality can occasionally go too far, in my opinion. You know, I would never spend £5 on a pair of cables. But if I may give some advice to people who are potentially starting off, it would be to distribute your money evenly. As you've just seen with my setup, there are 3 basic components you need: an amplifier, speakers, and a turntable. Now, you don't necessarily need to get an amplifier if you get a pair of powered speakers, but a lot of the time powered speakers won't have the inbuilt phono stage that's required for a turntable. But yeah, if you've got a £1,000 budget, try and spend, you know, £300 on one, £300 on the other, and £300 on the last one, instead of spending £800 just on the turntable and getting some really, really fancy turntable. Because if that then gets paired with a £100 amp and a £100 pair of speakers, the reasons that the turntable cost £800 won't be audible. The higher up in quality things get, the smaller the differences become. So yeah, a system is only as good as its weakest link. Now let's have a look at my ritual and process when it comes to actually playing the records themselves. Now for storage, I've gone for the classic IKEA Kallax unit. I feel like these are a must-have for record collectors, especially if you're on a budget. I used to have a 4-cube one of these, but it was a glorious, glorious day when I ran out of space and had to get an 8-cube one instead. Now, just in case anyone is interested in exactly what's in my record collection, there'll be a link to a video up there, which is just me going through my whole collection, although there have been quite a few additions to it since then. But spoiler alert, if you're a massive snob, you might get quite triggered. Now, these top ones especially are quite full, and one of the things that you want to be careful about with records is that you don't store them with too much pressure on them. Never store them on top of one another, but even if they're vertical, you don't want them to be pushing against each other too much. And it's something that I always struggle with, because I don't want them to end up leaning, because then I feel like there will be some that are getting more pressure than the others. But often to have them all standing up vertically feels like I'm putting too much pressure in that cube itself. If anyone has any suggestions on how I can get past that, then I would be more than happy to hear it. But at the moment, all I do is just make sure that things are still kind of loose in there, you know, so it's not difficult to pull out a record. So you can see there's a good amount of wobble there. They're not too pressed together, but if someone thinks that that's way too much pressure, then let me know. Another thing that can be useful when storing your records is using vinyl sleeves. You know, they're these cheap little plastic wallets that you can just pop your records in. I don't have them on every single one of my records, but all of my most prized records and ones that are very valuable to me, like sentimentally, I will keep in a sleeve just because I don't want them to get damaged, especially if they're rare. Now, last time I made this video, I sampled this record. That resulted in my video being effectively demonetized. It was claimed by the label that Oh Wonder Under, understandably so, like, that's fine. I mean, the fact that it is to this date my most viewed ever video is kind of annoying, but whatever, I shouldn't have used music that wasn't mine, I guess. But I was trying to think of a way for this video of me to be able to play some music on vinyl that wouldn't result in a copyright strike or me losing out in any of the like 3 pence of ad revenue I tend to get. And then I realized I could just use this. This is my record. I wrote the music on here, so there's no chance of this video getting claimed. Records are delicate, fragile, and they need a bit of care and a bit of love. So it's important, firstly, to try and minimize any pressure that you're putting on any part of the disc that's got grooves present. Because the grooves on an LP are where the music lives. Even when it's still in its sleeve, you know, just be careful. And then when you're taking it out, just hold the very edge of the record. And then I kind of use my palm as a balance to gently pull it out of its sleeve. And when you're holding it, have your fingers on the edge and put your thumb against the center label there to give it balance if you needed to do that. And try and make sure you've got at least relatively clean hands. Now, because I don't have a dust cover on this turntable, there is the risk that dust will build up on the surface. So every couple of days, I try and remember to kind of grab it and give it a bit of a shake, make sure there's no dust on there. But if you see that the platter itself is all dusty, try and sort that out before you put your record on there, because it's just gonna be a magnet for all of that stuff. And then just gently put the record on the platter. I don't know if you ever get annoyed with this, but occasionally a record will have not been cut properly. Like the hole will be slightly too small for that thing there, and then you have to like put too much pressure on to get it through, and then when it comes to taking it off, you've got to like shimmy it around a bit, and it's always really nerve-wracking for me because I'm worried I'm just gonna destroy the record or snap it in half or something. So at this point I would probably use my anti-static cleaning brush, and I would use this regardless of whether or not it was a new record or an old one, even ones that have come like fresh off the press. You still want to give them a dust just in case there was anything flying around in the plant, and also a lot of the time you get static buildup on these things. I would love to get one of those ionizing guns that kind of just gets rid of static, but I've just got to make do with this. Now, one of the biggest mistakes that I had made in the last video, which someone graciously pointed out to me, I was using this, putting it on the record, bringing it to the outside, wiping it on my hands. As was correctly pointed out to me, this would result in all of the grease and grime on my hand getting on the brush, so the next time I wipe anything with it, it's just making the record even worse. But also, I wasn't getting rid of the static. It would need to be grounded somewhere. And the static is what causes the kind of pops and clicks that you hear on a record. So the correct way to use one of these, at least as far as I know, is to, while the record is spinning, put it at a bit of an angle and then just apply a bit of pressure so that the record is just spinning over the bristles. Not too much, you don't want to be pushing down really hard, but then drag it in towards the center of the record. And you need to do this quite slowly, like it can take time, because if you do it too quickly, you'll just end up with a build-up of dust not being taken off the record, and there'll be a massive lump of it somewhere. And then when you've got to the center of the record, touch the metal bit against that there, and that should hopefully discharge at least some of the static electricity. And then, because these things swivel 360 degrees, there's a ridge in there, so you can sort of just do that and it should get rid of most of the dust. So hopefully the record is now mostly dust and static free. The stylus sometimes needs to be cleaned. You do not need to clean your stylus every single time you play a record. That'll actually probably be more damaging. Now, another thing I was corrected on in my last video is that I was using stylus cleaning fluid on a stylus that shouldn't really have that, because the liquid in this potentially dissolve the glue or cement or something within the stylus and make it worse. So don't use this if you've got an Autophon stylus, but do some research first. Work out what stylus you've got and how to best clean it. Someone suggested the other day that you can use blue tack to clean it. I haven't tried that yet. I'd be a bit nervous about it. It could be a really effective way of cleaning it. I just remove the cap, and then with my stylus brush, which is handy because it's got a mirror on one side and the brush on the other, so I can actually inspect the stylus and see if it needs to be cleaned. And if it does look like there's some dust on there or anything, I will just use the brush part of this and very, very gently push up on the stylus and wipe away, but you want to put very little pressure on there at all. And then you're basically ready to go. Obviously make sure that the tone arm lever is up so you don't accidentally just drop this straight onto the vinyl, and then just position that over the edge of the run-in groove and gently lower it down. That's my record setup and how I listen to records in 2019. I really do hope that you've enjoyed this and that maybe it's even been slightly useful for you. As I said earlier, if I'm getting anything wrong or if you've noticed anything that I could be doing better, please let me know in the comments down there. If any of you are interested in hearing some of my music, there'll be links in the description down there to my EP Her on vinyl, as well as on iTunes and Spotify and Amazon and all of that stuff. There'll also be a link to my Spotify page. If you want to keep up to date with my releases, then hit follow on Spotify because I'm releasing a new piece of instrumental music every 3 weeks until the end of December right now. Speaking of which, there'll also be a link to the pre-save for my latest instrumental track, He Is My Heart, which is coming out on Friday. Thank you so much for watching. I really do hope that you've enjoyed this. Have an absolutely fantastic day, and I will see you very soon.